Good morning. Thank you for joining me for Phaladipika. Today we're looking at how Phaladipika talks about the 7th and 8th house lords. Now they should be interpreted. He only gives one text for each, similar to how he handled the 5th house. So let's see what he says about the 7th. He says, Sat Sambandha Yute, Saptarkshe, Tadishe Balanvite, Pati Putravati Sadvi, Parya Savargunairvita. Sat Sambandha Yute, Saptarkshe, Tadishe Balanvite, Pati Putravati Sadvi Bharya Sadva Bharya Sarvagunavrita. This is kind of very basic. If the 7th house and its lord is connected to good planets. So, if it's very basic, you know what? That's great. Because it sort of means that we've been doing things correctly. This is a good bit of advice for any student of anything. If the new information that you're getting sounds like you have a whole new thing to learn here, then either the teacher is very disorganized or you haven't learned the previous lesson. But if the new stuff that you're hearing makes sense, it just seems like, yeah, of course. Okay, yeah. Then that means that you really understood the previous stuff. So that's also a reason why teachers will repeat something to make sure. And that's part of the reason why some of these books get very long and they just have a lot of examples. Teachers use examples a lot. So a lot of these things are not new principles. They're examples of the principles that he's previously given. So if the 7th house and its lord is connected to good planets, that's just a basic principle that he's been talking about forever in the book. If the 7th house and its lord is connected to good planets and the 7th lord is strong, then the person becomes a supporter of an exemplary and fertile wife surrounded by all desirable qualities. So it's really basic. He's just saying the 7th house is great if the 7th house is great. The 7th house is great if the 7th house is great and its lord is great. And the only semi-complicated thing is, how is it great? What do you mean that it's great? So he just gives the basic hint of the stuff that he's already talked about before, is that it should be Sat Sambandha Yute. That it should have contact with good stuff. So that's just shorthand for the stuff that he previously described. So if you have a natural benefic in the 7th house, while the 7th lord is in a benefic sign in Amsha and is influenced by, let's say, aspected by a natural benefic, then you get Sat Sambandha. And there's certainly many, many other possible combinations of ways to get Sat Sambandha. So maybe the first lord is in the 7th house. That's also an example of Sat Sambandha. Maybe the first lord is with the 7th lord or aspecting the 7th lord. Maybe the 5th lord, 9th lord, a good lord. Okay? Maybe Venus. I mean, you already know about Venus. It's not surprising because Venus is a natural benefic. But you can also, sometimes the karaka of the house won't be a natural benefic. But in that case, that karaka is still a sat planet. It's a good planet in relation to that house. Okay? Any questions? It's such a simple thing. And so he's saying if the 7th house is doing good, then its symbolism is doing good. It's the super basic stuff. So what is the symbolism of the 2nd house? Your wife. And your ability to be a husband if you're speaking to a male chart. If you're speaking to a female chart, then it's about your husband and your ability to be a wife. So that's what he's saying here. You'll be a pati and you'll have a nice bharya. You'll be if your seventh house is good, you'll be a good partner and you'll have a good partner. And what does it mean? He just adds this other stuff in here. This is putravati. Putravati means a person who's got a lot of kids. So in other words, the marriage will be fruitful. And second of all, it's sarvaguna. Your spouse will be very qualified. Any questions? It's okay to have questions on simple things. Actually, it's great to have questions on simple things because that means you're going pretty deep. So I think Christina is asking for an example. By the way, hi Shabri, hi Katarina, Kata, and hi Christina, hi Vana, hi Komodo, and hi John. Jonathan. Seventh Lord in a friendly Rashi. Seventh Lord in a friendly Rashi conjunct Saturn in a friendly sign. So the seventh Lord has joined Saturn and they're both in a sign that they're friendly with. Does it mean that there's a partner later in life? Thank you, Alpha. So he hasn't really said anything to that specifically. You know, and now you would also want to think about Saturn is what in this chart? Is it the sixth Lord? Is it the where is its Mool Trikona? Is it the sixth? Is it the third? Is it the 12th? Or is it the first or the fifth or the ninth or the fourth? It makes a big difference to the interpretation. And what's influencing this combo of 7 and Saturn? Is Mars influencing it or is Venus influencing it, for example? Then you'll get the picture of whether it's good or bad. And the good version of it is you get a spouse that's very patient and your relationships are more enduring. You get a person who's very practical. If the bad side of it, if the fewer good conditions around this combination, the more you get delay, or the spouse is infirm, like ill, or noticeably older than you. Hi, Shanti. All right. Yeah, so that's it. That's it for the seventh house. But does it need to be more than that? It's pretty simple, and simple is fine, right? We like simple. Jose says, what if the benefic affecting the seventh? So he says an interesting question. Satsambandha means seventh lord should have good connections. It should be in good circumstances. So I said, for example, if you have a benefic, natural benefic, let's say Venus. But now his question is, what if Venus is not a great house lord? So that's a simple thing that, like, I've gone through this before. I'm trying to remember exactly where. I think I have a report called The Houses of Life. Maybe that report or maybe the Secret Houses report. Let me check so I don't send you down the wrong path. I'm going to just check this in a second. Vic. Readings. Oh, wait, I don't want to check it like that. One second, sorry. Boom. So is it houses? In fact, I can show you this then. Yeah, let me show you this. Let me share this screen. So this is, for example, yeah, I don't want to show the chart itself, but this is just an example of Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. They have a particular nature to them, and then they have their dignity. The nature is complicated. All right, I can't show it to you on that. 1 second. The first lord always functions benefically. Yeah. Okay, so it's just it was actually that screen that I was showing you there. I'll just read you the text. Let me show it to you again. So this report is the houses of life. So in that report, I do this kind of calculation for you to figure out that kind of question that you're asking. Like, what if you have a natural benefic, but it's the lord of a difficult house? Vice versa, what if you have a natural malefic, but it's the lord of a good house? How do they, how do you decide whether this planet is good because it's the lord of a good house, or bad because it's a natural malefic, or vice versa, good because it's a natural benefic, or bad because it's the lord of a bad house? You don't choose one or the other is the short answer. You consider them both at the same time. So you merge them or you sum them. So the rule for it is the first lord always functions most benefically. So you give it plus 3 points. And this is true per house as well. The eighth lord, for example, is always beneficial for the eighth house. If a planet is not the first lord or the lord of the house under consideration, then other considerations apply. Second bullet point. It functions benefically if it owns a trine house. Why won't this? Here we go. It functions benefically if it owns a trine house, which is 5 or 9, or malefically if it owns a difficult house. And then also you'll have this question of, well, I have a planet that owns 2 houses, because most of them do, except for the sun and the moon. And let's say Saturn, it owns Capricorn and Aquarius. They're right next to each other. So it can own the 5th and the 6th. So it can own a trine and a deuce-stun. So which one? So you remember the primary ownership, the primary lordship of the planet is its mul trikona. And the secondary one is its domicile. So it's +1 or -1 if it's just the domicile sign happens. So for example, if Saturn has Capricorn on the 5th, and Aquarius on the 6th, then it's -2 for the fact that it's the 6th lord, and +1 for the fact that it's the 5th lord. So altogether it comes out as a +1, -1, as a -1. So the idea is, the short answer to this question is, you don't just pick what aspect of this planet you're going to look at, what facet of the planet you're going to look at. You take all the facets at one time and you summarize them all. And then on top of that, third bullet point is own benefic. Inherent benefic or malefic nature is another +or -1. So there was a video somewhere along the way. You could look up through my list of videos on that channel where I break this down for each rising sign and how the planets sum up as being good or bad for each rising sign. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. MM says, for Leo Lagna, the 7th lord is Saturn. a natural malefic, if it goes to Aries and is retrograde, will the retrogression modify the malefic outcome for the better? So as you know, if that's the thing, see, I am me. So I know everything that I talked about, but you're you, so you don't know everything I talked about. Just like I know something you talked about, but I don't know everything you talked about. That's why this new style of living is most inconvenient. The old style of living was people actually lived together. They didn't meet up on the internet. And there's a huge difference because of that. So anyhow, retrogression affects the brightness. Retrogression is a indicator which is basically consistent with the brightness of the planet. And the brightness of the planet is very important to consider how strong the planet is. So on that basis, when you have a retrogressing planet being debilitated, it's debilitated with strength. So it means it's put into very difficult situations, but it has a lot of strength to deal with those difficult situations. So the shorthand outcome people usually say about a retrogressed, debilitated planet is that it deals well with its stability. It deals well with its challenges, and it does actually succeed with those challenges. So when Saturn is in Aries but retrograde, then it's debilitated but with strength. If the seventh lord is Saturn in Aries, make it the ninth house, wouldn't it? Then you have a situation, not knowing the rest of the chart, which is very important to know, but not knowing the rest of the chart, you have a situation where the person has a lot of morality, but they make mistakes or foolishness probably out of naivety about what partner is acceptable or not acceptable. But after this trial and error, either the partner is reformed or corrected, or they correct their mistakes and don't make it twice. And that's how I would talk about that particular situation. Okay? Should we do more? Hi, Maria. Hi, Jody. Hi, Prithvi. Mr. Alf. Bardo. Alf, we should have done a live stream at the, what was that name of that place? Something ballroom, such and such ballroom. That would have been cool. Okay, let's proceed. Let's have a look at what he says about the 8th house now. Just like everybody loves Raymond, everybody loves the 8th house. Right? Prithvi. Jonathan, what do you think? What if many planets in the 7th Sagittarius? Okay. Sun, Mars, Mercury, Venus. Sun, Mercury within 1 degree, and Mars and Venus. Yeah, see, we thought that your question is a little bit overly specific, but why not? Because it's not like there's a flood of questions anyway. So the flaw of a question which is overly specific for a live stream with a group of 59 people watching is other people may not care because it's just way too specifically your question. The question that we like to respond to is a question that's not just one person's question. That would be 60 people's question. But let's see what this is. Maybe in a sense this is a big scope question. What if many planets are in the 7th house in Sagittarius? Sun, Mars, Mercury, Venus. Sun, Mercury within 1 degree, and Mars, Venus within 1 degree. Dispositor is Jupiter in the fifth house. All right, so Jupiter is in the fifth house. So that's 2 signs back from Sagittarius. So that's what, Libra? And Venus is over there in Sagittarius. Hello? Come on. Hello? You have a Raj Yoga. You have a Parivartana. But can I ask you a question, Prithvi? Is this a tropical chart? See, this is the other problem with very specific questions is people assume that I'm giving them a reading, but actually I'm just talking about your theoretical situation, which may not really be the way I would calculate your chart. But anyway, this is good. This is good because you have a Parivartana of 5 and 7, which is good. It's Raj Yoga and it's good for love and it's good for affection. So you have these other issues going on. The first lord being in the 7th house gives a lot of dependency upon the spouse, which can be, it could prove to be, that part can be proved to be challenging. All right, so you have the first lord Mercury in there. But I think you have a lot of stuff going on. And you have to do, when the other problem with specific questions is that it gives the impression now that you're getting a specific answer, but you're not, because to give any answer about a person's situation requires the astrologer to, just like ninja eyes. You know what ninja eyes are? The astrologer must have ninja eyes. Now, if you did not grow up in the 1970s Long Island, you might not know what ninja eyes are, but those of my friends and I who were obsessed with ninjas, we know what ninja eyes are. Ninja eyes mean you may be looking in one direction, but you're seeing in all the directions. So I might be looking right now at the camera, but I can be noticing what's going on over here. So the astrologer needs that eye with the chart. You have to look at the entire chart simultaneously, because there's way too many. That's why a chart is there. That's why we draw a chart, because it's really the only way to communicate the situation. So that's enough on that. Hope it was helpful. You said that the 7th ruler in the 7th house is not good. Sorry, Jonathan. Let's see what else Jonathan's doing. You said that the 7th ruler in the 7th house is not as good as in other cases, right? Because it stays away from you? Not exactly. The 7th lord in the 7th house, which was not true in Prithvi's case, or in the chart that she's referring to, the 7th lord needs to meet people. The 7th house is for partnerships, so the 7th lord needs to meet people. It's always nice to have the lord in the house, but one downside of the 7th house in particular is this lord, if it stays in its own house, it's like a person who stays in their own house. How do they meet people? So they become a little bit at a disadvantage of how they meet people. So therefore, it's also implied that the house that the Lord has gone to shows you where you meet people well, and where you meet spouse, etc. How you meet them. Alrighty? I think we'll go on. Jonathan, you can explain that I don't do Jaimini techniques. Let's go and look at 8th Lord. Or I just explained it, actually. And if another good question about the 7th house pops up, it's not too late. I'll take it again. But now let's go and see what he says about 8th Lord. he says, Kendrat anyatra randreshe, lagneshat durbalai sati, na dhir, na vigno, na klesho, nrinamayush chiram bhavet. So if the eighth lord is weaker than the first, this is a particular consideration for the eighth house. Don't use this as a template for every house. This is specific for the eighth house. If the randreshe lagnesha durbale, if the eighth lord is weaker than the first lord, and kendrat anyatra randreshe, if the eighth lord is not in a kendra, if it's not in an angular house, so there's two conditions, then the person is undeceivable, unopposable, unburdened, and long-lived. I like this a lot because it is a good education on the basics of what the eighth house represents and how it functions and what it does for a person. So this is really just following the same template as he just did with the seventh house, this uber simple approach to astrology. The uber simple approach is, if this house is good, then it's good. In other words, if the chart conditions on this house are good, then the things this house symbolizes in this person's life are good. It's that simple. But the interesting thing is what the good eighth house looks like. So the seventh house, it's simple. Everybody knows, oh, nice marriage, yay. The eighth house, what does a good eighth house mean? And also there's a unique thing about the eighth house and how it becomes good. He didn't give the usual formula, sat sambandha yute, that it has good connections. Because kind of good connections with the eighth lord is kind of messy. Because the eighth lord is kind of smelly and stinky. So when you have connections with the eighth lord, you're kind of stinking up the good planet that's connected with it. So instead, what you want to do with the eighth lord is get him out of the way and make him quiet. That's what he's saying. Get the eighth lord out of the way and make him quiet. Then you get a great eighth house. So his interpretive framework on that, which he specifically admitted previously, is when a house represents negative things, then getting that house to go away indicates positive versions of those negative things. So what do you mean get him out of the way? It means don't put him in a kendra. So it means don't make this planet dominant in the chart. And we can summarize that in shorthand by saying don't put him in a kendra. Don't give the planet a lot of influence in the chart. If the eighth lord has a lot of influence in the chart, it becomes an eighth housey kind of chart, and the eighth house is kind of a difficult place. But if you get the eighth house out of the way, if you get the eighth lord out of the way, then he can't smell up the place. And the other thing is make him quiet. So it means make him durbala, make him wimpy, make him weak. How would you assess how wimpy is wimpy enough? How weak is weak enough? It's relative to the first lord. Let the first lord be stronger than the eighth. However strong the eighth lord is fine, actually. So the best consideration would be to have a strong eighth lord and a stronger first lord. Because you do want to have all your lords being as strong as possible. But even if you have a weak first lord, as long as the eighth lord is even weaker, then you won't have problems. The chart doesn't indicate problems. And again, this just goes back to the previous lessons of what do you mean weak? So a lot of what we mean by weak is Shadbala, which he explained in chapter 4 or 3, which is published. So this is on my site right now, victorcara.com. This book's available. This is the first 4 chapters. It includes the chapter on Shadbala, which you would need to do to be able to figure out who's strong and who's weak planetarily. And then also you want to figure out who has dominance and who doesn't have dominance. And the principles for that are basically who's aligned with the ascendant degree and who's aligned with where the most of the planets are. Those planets get dominance. All right, so that's the technical part behind this particular verse. If the eighth lord is weaker than the first lord, and also not in an angular house, then the interpretive part is kind of much more interesting. Let me just see what's popping up. Katerina, so the sun with Saturn in the eighth. That might not be so bad then. I don't know. I can't really envision that. I can't envision the setting. Omari Jenkins. Just bear in mind also, when you have a sun in the eighth house, you know that this person was born near the sunset. So most of the symbolisms of houses and so forth is based on sunrise, sunset, etc. So you bear in mind, when the sun is in the eighth house, you have a sunsetty person. So everything that you think about sunsets classically, like embedded in our culture about sunsets, is probably kind of illustrative of this person. Omari, if the eighth lord is the sun, then you're a Capricorn. If the eighth lord is the sun, given the sun is such an important planet. Oh, this is quite an intelligent question. If the eighth lord is the sun, given that the sun is such an important planet, does that automatically make the eighth lord dominant, even if it's not in a Kendra? No. No. The sun can be weak. The naturally dominant, naturally importance is called Nysargika Bala, which should be ignored. And in most classical opinions, the Nysargik Bala is ignored. In the people who don't have that opinion, in the classical astrologers, what they do is they include Nysargika Bala, but then they handicap or they weight the scoring in such a way that it doesn't make a difference anyway. Because otherwise, every single person always has a dominant sun, and a next most dominant planet is always Moon. And next most dominant planet is always Venus, and next is always Jupiter. It would be the same for everybody, which is not the case, obviously. But what I thought your question was since the sun is such an important planet, because it's one of the three focal points, it's one of the three natural lagnas, then isn't Capricorn kind of at a disadvantage? Because it's a good idea to have the eighth lord be weak, but is it a good idea to have the sun be weak? So that's a pretty interesting question. And yeah, Capricorn is at a bit of a disadvantage. Do you usually find Capricorn to be kind of grumpy? And that grumpiness is a very eighth house equality. Grumpy. Brandon Scott, when Aries or Libra is rising, so the first lord is also the eighth lord, how do you modify the interpretation? Do you want the planet to have a stronger connection to its first house? So in those particular cases, it's the opposite of a Capricorn effect. Just as Capricorn is renowned, it has a trademark grumpiness to it. In other words, Capricorn has a trademark kind of sore thumb eighth house. Similarly, Aries and Libra have a trademark smooth eighth house. Now, you also don't want to forget that, like I just mentioned, the sun is an important planet because it's the third lagna. So you don't want to forget, like, what was in the secret houses report. Secret houses report. So I have a bunch of reports. I'm maybe going to put out a version 2.0 of all of them or something, because there's kind of getting to be too many. But one of them is called the Houses of Life, and we looked at how you calculate natural benefics and all that stuff just previously by looking at that report. But there's another one called Secret Houses. So what you have to do is you have to realize, okay, I have Libra rising, but my moon is not in Libra. And I have a whole secondary set of houses based on the position of the moon. So whenever you do anything, like whenever you say, how good is my 8th house, or how good is my 7th house, you shouldn't just look at you should, of course, primarily look at it from the ascendant. But then you should weight it with a little bit less important, but still important. What's the 7th house for my moon? What's the 8th house for my moon? What's the 8th lord for my moon, etc. Thirdly, your sun. And then you go in, if you're a brainiac, like maniacal geek, and you want to do a report, code a report in PHP and call it the secret houses, then you can do it the same thing for every Amsha chart, every house-based Amsha chart. So you can go through the Navamsha, Dashamsha, Saptamsha, Dvadashamsha, and Shodashamsha, and get you'll see how your 8th house in each one of those things is. And then you'll get a complete picture. That's what Secret Houses of Life report is doing. Ashish says, I guess he means, I don't know this pronoun, he. I guess he means other than Kendras from the ascendant and not Kendra from the ascendant Lord. Oh, he means Mantreshwar, since he said in previous chapter, planets of mutual Kendra influence each other. I guess he means Kendra other than Kendras from the ascendant. Well, this again, you're choosing something. You're choosing one or the other, but where you shouldn't be choosing. Both of the principles are important. The thing is, that's the thing. You take this really simple formula, like put the 8th lord anywhere except a Kendra. It's such a simple statement. And then you think, quick, I understand that, let's go to the next statement. Or you think, this is boring, this is too simple, I want advanced astrology. But that simple thing gets so complicated when you actually practice it. Because like you're saying, ascend Kendra to what? Well, it's Kendra to everything. So you wouldn't say, if you put the 8th lord in a Kendra to the ascendant, then it's prominent. But if it's by being in the Kendra to the ascendant, if it happens to not be in a Kendra to the first lord and not in a Kendra to the moon and not in a Kendra to the sun, then guess what? It's not really that prominent. Vice versa, even if you put the 8th lord not in a Kendra to the ascendant, but by the configuration of where the moon and the first lord and the sun are, now the 8th lord is Kendra to those, then you get something that is very prominent, an 8th lord that is very prominent, even though when you looked at it really simple, thinking you're following the rules, you found that it wasn't prominent. This is why you have to look at whole charts, and you can't just answer questions in a live stream about, you can't give people readings like that, unless you are just a lucky fellow or lass. And this is also why you might think, oh man, this breaks what if I'm Aries or Libra? It breaks I can't use this technique. Of course you can use the technique. Are you Aries or Libra for the moon too? And for the sun too? And for the first lord too? And how about in the Amshas? Prithvi. What if the 8th lord is also the 9th lord? Interesting question. What if the 8th lord is also the 9th lord? So again, it has to be Saturn. It's the only way this can happen, because this is the only planet that has own sequential signs. So if Saturn is 8th, you're going to have one of the air signs rising. Is it going to be Libra? It would be the first air sign rising, right? It would be Gemini rising. Saturn would be the 9th lord. Yeah. So what if Gemini is rising, Saturn is the 8th lord and the 9th lord, and it's in the 9th house? Is it good for the 9th house? It's great for the 9th house is the answer. Is it good for the 8th house? it's good for the 8th house too. And do you want to know why? It's because it's always good for a planet to be domicile. And it's always good for the houses that the planet owns when the Lord is domicile. Secondly, it's always good for a planet to be in a trine. It's almost always good for a planet to be in a Kendra, but it's always good for a planet to be in a trine. Komodo asks, is a planet that is combust automatically weak? Kind of, yes. The amount of combustion that is applied to the planet just kind of sucks away all of the other sources of strength of the planet. But just like the law of conservation of energy, wow, it's amazing. This is what happens when you live inside your head, is you don't live inside the world. This is like the VR headsets and the way they affect people. It's what happens when you constantly think about astrology. Anyway, where are we? What planet is this? What century? If a planet that is combust, yeah. So just the law of conservation of energy, the planet's power is not lost due to combustion, but the planet loses it. But the sun gains it. At least that's how I like to look at it. MNM asks, would we interpret the same outcome for a Libra set? This is the same question. Jody P asks, if the 8th Lord... That's the same question, isn't it? Pedro Jofili. The 7th house is prominent, but is the sunset? Is the 8th Lord in the 7th house weak because it is setting? This is a nice question. So the 7th house is a Kendra, but it's the sunset. Things set there. The 7th house is highly dependent upon the degree of the ascendant and the degree of the planet in the 7th house. So you see, his point is quite practical. His point is a planet that is in the 7th house is disappearing because it's in the 7th house, and that's the sunset. Yet it is also in a Kendra. So it's angular. So how should we assess this planet in the 7th house? Should it be assessed as having the qualities of strength and dominance because it's angular? Or should it be assessed as disappearing? So in all cases, the actual alignment of the planet to the degree of the ascendant is very important, but it's never more important than it is in the 7th house because the difference between the outcomes is so wide. So if the planet is in the 7th house, say at 29 degrees of the sign, and the ascendant is at 1 degree of the 7th sign from that, then that planet is disappearing. But if it's at 10, let's say if it's at 3 degrees of its sign and the ascendant is also at 3 degrees of the sign, then that planet is not disappearing. That planet is really strong because it's right opposite the ascendant. Dawn Woodhouse, your referral of checking the 8th from the sun and moon means the original 8th from the Lugna. No. So let's say you want to interpret any house. Any house. So let's say it's the 8th house. So in order to interpret this house, you want to know what the Lord is because you want to look at the Lord. So let's say you have a Capricorn ascendant and your moon is in Gemini and your sun is in Leo. So who's your 8th Lord? Well, primarily, the 8th sign from Capricorn is Leo. So primarily, the 8th Lord is the sun. But this person also has, and we should also mention the first Lord is in Taurus. But let's just cut it off somewhere, draw a line somewhere. The moon is in Gemini. So what's the 8th house from Gemini? Well, Sagittarius +1. So it's Capricorn. So that's the problem of having a moon in the 6th house, is that your ascendant Lord becomes your 8th Lord. 8th Lord from the moon. So you don't just have the sun as the eighth lord. You have the sun as the primary eighth lord. You have the Saturn as the secondary eighth lord, and the sun is in Leo. So what's the eighth house from Leo? It is Aquarius +1. So it's Pisces. So it's Jupiter is the third eighth lord. So now you want to evaluate, is the sun in a Kendra? Is Saturn in a Kendra? Is Jupiter in a Kendra? How strong are they compared to the first lord? You have to do that for all three. How strong are they? Now, maybe this was actually a question. How strong are they compared to the first lord? Well, the first lord is also tertiary, also triplicate. So when you're comparing with the sun, you will compare it against Capricorn's lord, Saturn. When you're comparing it with the moon, which is in Gemini, you'll compare it with Gemini's lord, Mercury. See, it's these simple things. There's no rush to go and hear about some fancy stuff. If you just stick with the simple things, it's plenty complicated to do it correctly. Shanti asks, how does the sun gain the strength? The sun gains the strength like just like in a war. In a Graha Yuddha, the planet that wins gains a certain percentage of the bala of the planet that loses. You just plus it to the bala. So also with the sun, in the combustion, you plus the bala into the sun, so the sun becomes more dominant. I think, the Graha Yuddha thing is a classically accepted principle, but it's my way of thinking that the sun gains the strength of the combusted planet. So you can take that or take it or leave it. Omar, how do the nodes like being in the 8th house? I would imagine Ketu would be decent, but Rahu seems like things could get crazy. Yeah, I would agree. All right, now I want to move on to the part that I actually like the most about the entire section that we're going to look at today, which is the words that he uses to describe good effect of the 8th house. This is really important to understand what this 8th house is and what it deals with, what it affects. So he says, if you have a good 8th house, then you should have Nadhir, Navigna, Naklesha, and Ayushchira. So 3 nas, 3 no's. Na Adhir, na Vigno, na Klesha. So what's the 8th house? Well, the 8th house is Klesha, the 8th house is Vigna, and the 8th house is Adi. What do those words mean? Klesha means troublesome. A klesha is a trouble or a burden or some weight that you have to carry. So the 8th house is troubling. Much like the way OCD troubles a person. The OCD troubles a person by constantly giving a worry that something is wrong. That's what the 8th house does. The 8th house is obsessed with things being wrong. Things are not going right, or things will not go right. That's the 8th house. That's how the 8th house is thinking. So the 8th house deals with klesha, troubles, anxieties. Vigna. The 8th house deals with vigna. Vigna is things that stop you. You're trying to go east and then there's a big wall and you can't keep going. So then you have to stop and think, how do you deal with this situation? Should you turn around and go back? Should you go a different direction? Should you try to knock down the wall, climb the wall? What do you do? That's 8th house. If you live in the 8th house, that's what you deal with all the time. You deal with how to overcome problems. And then the 8th house is klesha, or troubles, burdens, worries. Vigna, obstacles, problems, blockages. and adhi. Dhi is the mind and the intellect and its ability to focus. And see and perceive something. So now the prefix is going to be applied adhi, which means the person can't really focus. The eighth house is full of worries. So it's hard for the eighth house to just calmly think about something. It's eighth house is in emergency mode often. Damage control mode. So it has to do with adhi, where you can't keep your presence of mind, or you can't keep your patience. So that's the eighth house. So what if it's going good? If the eighth house is going good, what do you get? You get na adhi, na vigna, na klesha. No anxieties, no blockages, and no perturbation of the mind. Good focus. So the person will be undeceivable. That's the implication of nadhir. If a person is focused, then you can't distract them. That's why magicians work by moving your focus to the place where they want it and then doing something over here where your focus isn't. Then they bring your focus back. So focus is key to not being deceived. So if the eighth house is good, what is a good eighth housey person? This is a person whom you cannot lie to. They know what you are hiding because they're looking, they're patiently looking, they're observing carefully. They're not confused. They're not distracted. The second quality of a person with a great eighth house is navigna. That means you can't stand against them. You can't. There's no walls that can block these people. So you might think, oh, I'm gonna publicly disgrace this person and bring out, blah, blah, blah. This eighth house person will just steamroll your blackmail. It's just knock down your wall. A person with an extremely strong eighth house you cannot get in their way. You can't block them. Nothing gets in their way. And unburdened, naklesh, it means they're not carrying any extra weight. They don't have a lot of requirements. They don't have a lot of necessities. They're not carrying a lot of baggage. So they're unburdened. They don't have extra things to worry about. They worry about essentials. They focus on essentials. And then, of course, Ayush Chiram. That's an obvious thing, is since the eighth house deals with longevity. If the eighth house is good, then the longevity is long. So for me, that was the most important thing of the two texts that we looked at today, was to get this clear picture of what the eighth house really deals with, and therefore what it indicates if it's doing good. Okay? So I think I'll leave it at that. Any last questions? I can't believe it's the morning. Somehow I feel like it's the middle of the night. Let me see. So yeah, again, don't forget about this. It's called Essentials of Vedic Astrology. It's Phaladipika Part 1, translated into English. Chapters 1 through 4. We're now covering chapter 16. But Phaladipika's chapters are all over the place, disorganized. So I'm putting them all in different orders. This particular 16 will be published in Part 2. Because it's actually basic. So please get this. Even if you don't want to read it, just support the cause of studying good stuff. All All right, thank you, everybody, especially everybody that asked questions. The Cosmic Mom, I like that screen name. Alfonso. Jenny Love Dubs. Dr. Architect. Katarina. Ananda Krishna. Thank you, everybody. Chinmay Bhagavat. Oh, wait, we didn't take Chinmay Bhagavat's question? Just a minute. Well, I don't see Chinmay Bhagavat's question. What if the 8th Lord and the 11th Lord is in the 6th house? Can it indicate a good critique? What if the 8th Lord and the 11th Lord... well, the 11th Lord is Mercury. So that's the thing. You can have a good critical... Yes, so in other words, look at the components of this question. The 6th house and the 8th house. You're going to see this in the Jupiter in the 3rd video, which I'll... Yikes, it's the morning. I'll edit this today. You'll see a couple of the case studies of Jupiter in the 3rd house have the 8th Lord in the 6th. I think it's Ronaldo. Not Ronaldo. The other guy. Messi. Anyway, the 8th and the 6th have certain qualities that make them go very well together. So if putting the 8th Lord in the 6th house is quite a good thing. And it's actually called Viparit Raj Yoga. So you're putting the 8th Lord in the 6th house, and then you're adding Mercury there also. She's saying, is that look like somebody that, say, for example, is a good test taker? Or is a good problem solver? Or is a good critiquer? Or is a bit critical? Has a good critical mind. Yes. The side effect of 11th Lord, however, you don't really like to put the 11th Lord in the 6th house. Because the 11th house has nothing really in common with the 6th. Their flavors are quite different. It would be nicer to have the 11th Lord in the 5th or anywhere else. 4th, 1st, 2nd, 9th, 10th. 7th is kind of good if you can manage it. It gives a lot of romantic energy. But 11th and the 6th is a little bit austere. Okay, so I will now get on with the rest of my life. But thank you, everybody, for joining me. And please do everything awesome, like subscribe and all. Everything you already probably did. Thanks so much. And thank you, John.